Hey there, welcome back to part 2 of LA Fishguys calcium reactor and protein skimmer episode. We've taken the calcium reactor, rinsed out the gravel, carefully reassembled the calcium reactor. We've now positioned it within the cabinet and we're getting ready to begin to hook it up. So we need a unit to send water to the calcium reactor. We're going to use this small little power head with the adapter there on the end and some airline tubing to be the source or supply of water for the calcium reactor. It's going to pump that water out of the sump into the reactor, and then it'll come back into the sump. So here we've got the discharge line attached to that barbed adapter. We're now going to go ahead and slip it into the sump. There are other ways of supplying the water to the calcium reactor. One would be a siphon coming from the tank above. Another would be to tap off the main water pump that's running the system. We're going to use this small power head that sits in the sump. And there's our small little pump, supply pump. And there's where it connects on the inlet of the calcium reactor. There is the outlet of the reactor, and we're going to hook up the line that's going to return it back into the sump. Ultimately, it will attach to that fitting right there, but we need to get the fitting or the adapter first. So for the moment, it's going to run off the top of that and probably just dangle in here on the back side of the sump. So that's how the water gets into the calcium reactor. Now we need to figure out how to get the CO2, the carbon dioxide gas, into the calcium reactor. And that involves a canister filled with carbon dioxide that has a regulator on top of it. The regulator does a few things. One, it monitors the pressure within the cylinder itself. Two, it regulates or restricts the high pressure down to a manageable pressure. Once we've got the pressure down to a manageable level, we still need a means of counting or measuring or monitoring the amount of gas entering the cylinder. We can do this through the use of what's called a bubble counter. In this particular case, we have a bubble counter that we're going to be filling with a very viscous fluid. We have to create a siphon just to get this sucked into the cylinder itself. But you can see here in a moment how effective the viscous solution is at animating almost in a slow poke manner the bubbles that going into the bubble counter.
How many bottles? 2 bottles?
So with the bubble counter filled with its viscous solution, we'll slide the bubble counter into its bracket. We'll take the discharge side of the bubble counter and hook it up to the inlet side of the recirculation pump on the calcium reactor. With all of the connections securely in place, we'll go ahead and plug in the small little pump, begin to fill the calcium reactor with water. But our intent here is to flush the calcium reactor of its sand and silt so that we don't introduce that directly into the system. With the reactor full of water, it's now going to flush itself of that sand and silt inside of it. We're going to allow that to flow into a 5-gallon bucket. This doesn't take long, so we can take the hose and almost place it back in the sump using a small restricting valve to regulate the flow coming out of the calcium reactor. So with the calcium reactor now running, it becomes a pressurized vessel. Leaks, if they're going to occur, begin to show up at this point. Here we've got a leak on the inlet side. In this case, it's an easy fix. We just need to tighten that inlet barb fitting a bit more. Now that the unit is running, you can see the body of the calcium reactor contains the calcareous gravel. In this case, it's an aragonite type media.
We're going to circulate water within this calcium reactor. Additionally, we're going to input some of the water from the aquarium, which creates the source for the calcareous water leaving the reactor. We're also going to introduce some carbon dioxide gas into this cylinder as well.
So now that the unit is running, this is the effluent, or the water that will carry the concentrated calcium solution into. According to the instructions, we want to adjust this so that you're getting approximately 1 drop per second. Ultimately, once you get comfortable with the unit and determine how much it's actually generating versus how much your tank is consuming, you may want to adjust this upwards to possibly a solid stream or a very quick series of drips. This is the bubble counter, and we want to adjust the CO2 to create about
1 to 2 bubbles per second. You can see here how the viscous solution magnifies the individual bubbles themselves. I've set up a few reactors in the past where the bubble counter is filled with water, and it's not as easy to determine the bubble rate as it is here in this viscous solution. So for all the trouble of filling that bubble counter with that fluid, it certainly appears to be a benefit. With the calcium reactor now running, we want to go back and complete operation on the protein skimmer because it's starting to add a lot of little bubbles into the aquarium. So come on back for part 3.